It started out like any typical story of betrayal. I was getting ready for a business trip, about to board my private plane, when I got a call saying I wasn't needed after all. So, I turned the plane back to the hangar, knowing I'd need it again in a few days, and parked it there before heading home. I checked in with my boss, and we agreed I could take the rest of the day off. It was close to 4 o'clock, and by the time I got home, it would be nearly 5:30, just around when my wife usually got back. I figured I'd surprise her and take her out to dinner. Turns out, I did surprise her, but she managed to shock me even more. The moment she knew I'd be out of town, she and a friend made their own plans and even left work early to jumpstart their evening. As I pulled into the driveway and noticed her car parked next to another unfamiliar vehicle in the garage, my stomach dropped. I feared the worst. Carefully, I entered the house, and sure enough, there were signs everywhere, her shoes thrown haphazardly by the back door, a blouse left on the stairs, and more clothes strewn about, leading right up to the spare bedroom. The door was left open, like they had rushed inside. I walked in and found them. He stood by the bed while my loving wife knelt before him. His groans of satisfaction filled the room, and even though I had mentally braced myself for something like this, the sight hit me like a truck. To anyone wondering if I found any amusement in this, trust me, I didn't. There was nothing entertaining about watching the woman I trusted, my wife, caught up in something so intimate with another man. I had to hold myself back from reacting violently. After he finished up and told her to lie on the bed, I decided it was time to announce my presence. I cleared my throat. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, my voice sharp. "And who is this guy?" The man's smug grin quickly turned into sheer panic. He stumbled over his words, saying, "I thought you were out of town." I turned to my wife, and in her eyes, I saw the moment she realized the full weight of what was happening. "Get him up and come with me downstairs," I ordered. I spotted his phone tossed aside on the floor and picked it up. Scrolling through his contacts, I found one saved as home and dialed. A woman answered, slightly out of breath. "Hey, Mark," she said, recognizing the number. "I just got home, so don't bother telling me you're running late again." I answered her instead. "Mark's not making excuses tonight. And before you ask, no, he's not hurt, at least not yet. But you'll want to hear this. I just walked in on your dear Mark with his dick in my wife's mouth." Her shocked voice came through loud and clear. "What the, who is this?" I had a bad feeling something was off, but this. "You've gotta be kidding me. I never want to see him again. Where do you live?" I gave her my address and added, "Drive safely. Don't want anything to happen to you. If someone deserves to get hurt here, it's not you." After hanging up, I turned my attention back to the two of them sitting awkwardly in my living room. "Go stand by the window," I said. Mark resisted. "No way," he muttered. But Allison, my wife, dragged him over, and I could hear him yelp in pain as she twisted his arm. "Damn it, Allison, let go." "She's not letting go until I say so," I told him firmly. "You see, there are a few things you don't know about me. Hell, even Allison doesn't know." I let a small smile creep across my face. "It seems we've got a little time before your wife shows up, so I'll fill you in." Their expressions were a blend of confusion and fear. Up until I was 18, I lived a completely ordinary life. Average height, average weight, brown hair, brown eyes, nothing special. I'm not particularly handsome, but I'm not ugly either. Wouldn't you agree? They remained silent, wide-eyed. Around that time, I discovered something unique about myself. If I lock eyes with someone for just a few seconds, I can plant a thought in their head. It could be something harmless like, "Your name is now Tom," or something far more intense, like, "If you don't do what I say, you'll feel the flames of hell licking at your skin." That last example is the exact thought I've placed in Allison's mind. As you might guess, I had a lot of fun with this ability once I mastered it. For example, back in high school, I made a bully believe it was perfectly fine to moon the entire crowd at graduation. I've pulled plenty of stunts over the years and even used my power to dodge small run-ins with the cops. I also used it to enjoy some rather memorable nights with women, convincing those who initially turned me down to change their minds and do things that would make most folks blush. One incident that stands out was with the daughter of a local Air Force general. Her mom walked in on us, and I couldn't help but notice how attractive she was too. I convinced her to join in, but things got cut short when the general himself stormed in. He was ready to tear me apart, but I managed to show him that my ability could influence people on a level deeper than any hypnosis. That got the attention of Homeland Security. They saw the potential for using me in interrogations and intelligence work. We struck a deal. I'd get a 6-figure salary, a private plane, and they'd maintain it as long as I completed certain tasks for them. My official title is Troubleshooter, which explains why I sometimes get pulled away at a moment's notice. Part of the arrangement was that I had to stop using my ability for personal gain. Eventually, I found that I preferred real, meaningful connections with people who liked me for who I am, not because I twisted their thoughts. June was an exception to that rule, and now I'm paying for it. We'd even talked about starting a family soon, but with everything unraveling, I'm more interested in figuring out what's really been going on. While waiting for Mark's wife to arrive, I glanced over at him and decided I might need some evidence of their little affair. "June, kiss him," I ordered, "and put your hand on his chest." She obeyed, and I snapped a dozen or so pictures, ensuring I had plenty of material in case I needed it later. Just as I finished, I heard a car pull up in the driveway. I told June to stop and go back to standing by the window. Setting the camera down, I made my way to the front door and opened it just as she was about to knock. "You must be Mark's wife," I greeted her calmly. "I'm Cliff Derringer, and I'm guessing the guy standing next to my wife, June, is your husband, Mark." "Yeah, I wish I could say it's nice to meet you," Darlene responded, her eyes scanning the room. She walked straight over to Mark, who immediately dropped his gaze to the floor, and then turned her attention to June, who did the same. Without warning, she slapped Mark so hard his head snapped to the side. "Do you have any shame? Couldn't you at least put some damn clothes on?" "Actually, that's my doing," I chimed in. I figured it might make them feel some guilt and maybe a little regret, not just for getting caught. Darlene eyed June again. "Would you look at that? She's still holding on to him. What kind of shameless woman did you marry, Cliff?" "That's on me too," I replied. "It helps me keep him under control. Here, watch this." Darlene's eyes widened as June tightened her grip on Mark. "What the hell was that for?" Mark gasped. "What did I ever do to you?" "That's a pretty stupid question," June shot back. "Ease up a little," I told her, "but don't let go just yet." I locked eyes with Mark for a moment, and that's all I needed. "All right, I want both of you to spill the truth now," I ordered. "No more lying or making yourselves look innocent. Tell us everything, no half-truths." "Mark, why don't you start? What's the story here?" Mark sighed and began. "We met way back in high school." The possibility that this affair had started long before our marriages immediately crossed both Darlene's and my mind. Mark continued, explaining that it all began when we were just starting our senior year. June and I hadn't crossed paths before then since we ran in different circles. But when we ended up sitting near each other in science class, we hit it off almost immediately. From there, it was like we were glued together, spending every moment we could with each other. After Easter break, things escalated, and we, got intimate for the first time in the back seat of my car. After that, we were inseparable, never had a big fight, and I was head over heels for her. Then, out of the blue, she left. It was May 2nd, Mark continued, his voice full of regret. "I remember the day clearly. I went to pick her up for school, but her dad met me at the door and said she was gone. He made it clear she wasn't coming back and told me to leave and never ask about her again. I was crushed, thinking she'd run away from me. I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. For weeks, I kept showing up at her house, pleading for any information about where she went or why she left. Her parents refused to tell me anything and eventually threatened to call the cops if I didn't stop. They followed through, and the police dragged me to the station. After my parents arrived, the officer let me go with a warning that I'd be arrested if I returned. I was absolutely devastated, lost, and had no one. I managed to finish my senior year, but the pain drove me to join the army for 4 years, just to escape the loneliness. While I was in the army, I met Darlene. We got married, and I convinced myself I'd never see June again. After getting out, Darlene and I moved back here about 6 months ago. Then, a few months later, I ran into June at the grocery store. We had a coffee together just to catch up. At first, it was harmless, just some light flirting. But 2 weeks ago, I came over when you were out, and things got out of hand. We both swore it wouldn't happen again, but it did, just a week later. And today makes the 3rd time. We're both really sorry, and we never meant for it to hurt you guys. Alright, June. Let's hear your side now, I said, turning to my wife. The first part is just like Mark said, June began. We met our senior year and dated for a few months. Everything was going great until I missed my period and took a pregnancy test. I remember sitting on my bed, holding the test in my hand, crying, when my mom walked in and saw what was going on. I tried to hide it, but she saw it anyway. She was upset but tried to comfort me until Dad got home. His reaction, though, was totally different. He was furious. After he calmed down, he said he'd arrange for an abortion, and we shouldn't tell anyone, not even Mark. I told him I couldn't go through with it, that it was my body and my choice. That sparked another huge fight. Eventually, we settled on a compromise. I'd carry the baby to term but put it up for adoption. The catch was, I couldn't tell anyone about it, not even Mark. That very night, I had to leave for my Aunt Janice's place in South Dakota, a 7-hour drive away. Dad's one unbreakable rule was that I couldn't contact anyone here, especially not Mark, to say goodbye. If I did, he threatened to cut me off from the family completely. So, you've had a child this whole time, and you never thought to mention it to me? I asked, my voice edged with disbelief. June nodded slightly. I went to Aunt Janice's and finished the school year there. I couldn't go to school that fall because I was starting to show, and it would have broken the deal I had with Dad. Once my belly started to grow, I became a prisoner in her house. I had no friends, no family, no one except for my parents, and even then, I didn't talk to them because I was too upset. My world became my aunt, the child I was carrying, and my own thoughts. I sank into a deep depression about 6 months into the pregnancy. After I finally got through that, I came back home only to find out Mark had joined the army, and his family had moved away right after he graduated. I was heartbroken all over again. I stayed home feeling miserable for months until Dad convinced me to get a job and try to move on. I started working at Dr. Jensen's office, and after a while, I began dating again. It wasn't long after that I met you, Cliff. Our life together made me forget all about Mark, at least until we bumped into each other at the grocery store. Well, isn't that just a sweet little story? Darlene cut in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. A tale of teenage love, lust, and betrayal. You both made these promises to love each other, and if this is what that looks like, maybe I should return the favor and kick you both to the curb. Were you two planning to run off together, or what? No, Cliff, June responded quickly, her voice almost desperate. I love you. I never wanted to leave you. Mark looked startled, as if he had expected to be her first choice, but he didn't say a word. So, what exactly was the plan here? Did you think I'd just accept this affair? Or maybe you thought you could have it both ways? I pressed. Did you seriously believe you could betray me with Mark, giving him something that belongs to me, whenever he wanted it? June shifted uncomfortably. I didn't think it through like that. I didn't want to leave you unless Mark left Darlene. I guess I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I turned to Darlene. What's your take on this? Do I have a loving wife, or am I just fooling myself? Darlene shook her head. I'm not much better off, honestly. Mark and I were together for about a year when I got pregnant with Joey, our son. Now I'm wondering if that's the only reason he married me. It's clear he still had feelings for June this whole time. Mark's expression darkened when June said she didn't want to leave me, but again, he stayed silent. So, did you think I'd just be okay with your affair? I continued. Did you think you could have both of us without dealing with the consequences? Mark hesitated before answering. I never really thought it all the way through. I didn't want to leave you and Joey either, Darlene. But part of me wondered if maybe June and I could work things out. It stung hearing her say she loves him. I guess I always assumed she'd still feel that way about me. Since I'd never met Cliff, it was easy to pretend he wasn't part of the picture, like June and I could just pick up where we left off in high school. But the truth is, I'm confused because I still love you too, Darlene. I sighed, summing it up. They didn't betray each other, but they sure as hell betrayed both of us. June and Mark started to protest, but they stopped when they saw the look on Darlene's face. After a moment, June added, it's a different kind of love. It's not like I love one of you more than the other. The love I have for Cliff is steady, trusting, it's a comfortable love. But with Mark, it's that intense first love that never got a chance to fully blossom. I looked her straight in the eye. Do you remember our wedding day? Standing in front of all those people, taking vows to love and cherish each other, forsaking all others. You swore to love only me, and I made the same promise to you. There was no fine print allowing for indiscretions. So, tell me, what other promises have you broken? Have you always been faithful to me since the day we got married? Yes, June said firmly. That answer seems a bit too simple, I replied. Have you ever done more than just flirt with someone else? No, not since we were married, she insisted. So, what about when we were dating? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Well, when we first started dating, we weren't exclusive. I was still seeing someone else when you asked me out. I kept seeing him for a little while until we agreed to be exclusive. I didn't tell you, but we met up a few times just for physical reasons. I felt guilty, especially since I'd just broken things off with him for you, June confessed. So, you were lying and cheating from the very start. How many times did this happen? We only met up a handful of times, she said quietly. It didn't mean anything to me. Well, it sure as hell means something to me, I shot back. It means you were unfaithful and robbed us of time we could have spent together. No, June protested weakly. It only happened on nights when you were away for work. We wouldn't have been together anyway. That doesn't change the fact that you had to reach out to him, arrange these meetings, and make it happen. Even if you convinced yourself it was no big deal, that sounds like premeditated cheating to me. June dropped her head, her voice barely audible. It wasn't like that. So, when did you finally cut it off with him, and why? I asked. The last time we saw each other was 4 months before the wedding. He got transferred to another city, and it was sort of a goodbye. Before that, we hadn't seen each other since 2 months after we started dating, she admitted. So, it could have kept going as long as you had a reason, couldn't it? I asked, my frustration growing with every word. June's eyes welled up with tears, her gaze dropping to the floor. The weight of her choices was hitting her hard. I wish things had been different, she whispered. I love you, Cliff. I regret how everything turned out and how it's damaged what we have. Is this because I didn't give you enough attention? I asked, trying to make sense of it all. I'm not gone that often. And whenever I am, I make sure our time together is special. I've always tried to give you the best life I could. Wasn't that enough for you? June shook her head, her voice trembling. It wasn't about you, Cliff. It was about Mark and me, and the unresolved feelings between us. You've been an amazing husband. If my actions made you think otherwise, then I've made a terrible mistake. So, what then? I pressed. Did you think I was just some provider? A fallback you could toss aside when a better option came along? Was I just a stepping stone for you? No, Cliff, June insisted. When I married you, it was because I truly loved you and wanted to build a life with you. I still feel that way. I deeply regret what's happened. It's funny you call this an accident, I said with a bitter laugh. You didn't just cheat, you brought him into our home. Into the place we've built together. That shows a serious lack of respect, June. She looked at me with pleading eyes. Is there any chance we can move past this, Cliff? I still love you. Please. I took a deep breath, feeling the mess of emotions swirling inside me. Maybe, in time, I could forgive you, June. But I'll never forget what you've done. And it's going to take a long time before I even think about trusting you again. Can you live with that? With me constantly checking up on you, questioning who you're with, what you're doing. And let's make one thing clear, Mark can never be a part of our lives again. You need to make a decision right now. I paused, my tone softening slightly. I don't want to force you into staying with me out of fear. I want to be with someone who genuinely wants to be here, who chooses to be loyal without me having to watch their every move. I need to know, do you really want this life with me, more than anything? June hesitated, her eyes flicking between Mark and me. That's a big decision, I said quietly, watching her struggle with the weight of the choice. Her hesitation said more than her words ever could. It made me question whether she truly loved me more than him. Even if she chose me right now, I couldn't shake the feeling she might come to regret it. She took a step toward me, but her hand was still touching Mark, and it was like that simple act pulled him with her. Realizing what she was doing, she let go abruptly and fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, Cliff, give me another chance, she begged. I shook my head, my voice firm. You've made your choices, June. Now you'll have to live with the consequences. Darlene, who had been quiet for a while, finally turned her attention to Mark. Mark, it looks like June might be available soon. Are you planning to stay with your family, or do you want to be with her? If you want her, you'll have to prove you're worth keeping, assuming you want to stay with me. I chimed in, you really need to figure out what you want, Mark. Mark's voice cracked as he replied, I'm sorry, Darlene, while she buried her face in her hands, sinking onto the couch. All right then, I said, the frustration mounting in my chest. Now everyone's true colors are on full display, aren't they? Some folks, when they're in a situation like this, might reach for a gun or lash out in a fit of rage. Others might publicly humiliate the cheaters or resort to violence. But that's not who I am. The tension in the room lessened just a bit as I continued. You're both going to face the consequences, though. I turned to June, my voice colder than before. June, do you remember my job required us to sign a prenup because of the nature of my work? Well, that's about to come into play. You'll be walking away with only a small fraction of our joint assets. If you'd stuck around longer, you could have gotten more, but you couldn't even make it to our second anniversary. The prenup clearly states that if either of us cheats, the cheater gets whichever is less, either $10,000 or 5% of our total worth, for each year of loyalty. If we'd made it to 10 years, we'd have split everything evenly. Oh, and by the way, the plane. That's mine. But you're welcome to keep the bed where all of this happened because I sure don't want it. I turned my attention to Mark. Secondly, as part of your punishment, you will lose the ability to father children or engage in any intimate activities. That's something you'll have to live with from now on. Mark's eyes widened in pure horror as the weight of my words hit him. I didn't need to explain further, the message was clear. Darlene glanced between us, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Come with me to the kitchen," I whispered to her, gently guiding her out of the room. Once we were in the kitchen, I quietly explained, "I've used a type of mental influence on Mark to make sure his actions have lasting consequences. I know it sounds extreme, but after what he's done, I felt it was necessary to make sure he understands the gravity of his choices. No physical harm has been done, but this is my way of ensuring he never repeats the mistake." Darlene gave a small, weary smile. "I didn't expect that, but it's a nice smile, one I hope you keep. I know this is a hard time for you and Joey." I nodded, continuing, "I'll be burying myself in work for a bit to sort everything out in my head. You've gone from having a family to being a single parent, and that's a huge shift. As for me, my life won't change as drastically. I've got my family's support to help me through this. You might have to decide whether to kick Mark out or move out yourself. It's probably better to stay put for Joey's sake, but I get it if that's not possible. Maybe talk things over with your family, they'll have a clearer perspective on your situation." "I will," Darlene agreed. "For now, I'll make it clear to Mark that he's not welcome back. I'm serious about being here for you and Joey too. It could be healing for me in a way, no strings attached." As we walked back into the living room, raised voices met us. Mark and June were locked in an argument. "Why did you have to crush me like that?" Mark shouted, his voice filled with pain. "He made me do it. I didn't have a choice." June cried out, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't see him force you," Mark shot back bitterly. I stepped in, my voice sharp. "You brought this on yourselves, Mark. You both got exactly what you deserve. Congratulations, your actions have made 4 divorce lawyers very happy, but you've left your spouses and a child deeply hurt. Honestly, for the first time since we got married, I'm relieved we don't have a child." June turned to me once more, desperation in her voice. "Cliff, please, reconsider. I'll do better, I swear." I shook my head, firm in my decision. "You turned what should have been a straightforward choice into something complicated, June. You hesitated. Part of you still wanted both of us, and that may work for people who cheat, but it doesn't work for me, or for Darlene. We both know that any real relationship needs love, trust, and respect. Maybe you think you still love us, but from where we stand, there's no respect and no trust left." June seemed to finally grasp the full reality of the situation, collapsing to the floor in uncontrollable sobs. I stood there, watching her break down, knowing that this was the end. I could only hope they found the happiness they thought they'd get from each other because, as far as Darlene and I were concerned, we were done with them, completely. I gave them one last look before speaking again, my voice calm but unwavering. "Forget what I said about my job and my abilities. What matters now is the reality of what's happened today and the consequences of your choices. Mark, you will own up to what you've done publicly, and you will not fight the divorce." Darlene spoke up next, her tone cold and final. "I need to pick up Joey from the sitter and get home. Mark, I don't know where you're planning to sleep tonight, but it sure won't be with me. Don't come back to the house. Once you find a place to stay, we'll work out how to get your things." With that, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Goodbye, Mark," she said firmly as she walked out without a second glance. Mark shouted after her and made a move to follow, but realizing his lack of clothes, he turned and rushed upstairs to get dressed. Not even 30 seconds later, he was half-dressed and out the door, chasing after her. I looked down at June, still sitting on the floor, her face wet with tears. "Don't just sit there. Get up, get dressed, and get out. You've got 10 minutes, or I'll be throwing your stuff onto the front lawn." I glanced at my watch. "The clock's ticking, June. You'd better get moving." She stared up at me with pleading eyes, hoping for any hint of sympathy, but finding none. Slowly, she stood and headed upstairs to pack her things. 11 minutes later, she came back down, sniffling and clutching her bags. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat," I replied coldly. "You're not my problem anymore. As much as it hurts me to say this, it's for the best. I called your dad to come pick you up. He should be here soon." Her eyes widened in panic. "What did you tell him? Does he know why?" "No," I answered. "I didn't explain anything. That's for you to tell. All I said was that you won't be staying here anymore and you need a place to go. Once you're settled, you can call me to arrange picking up the rest of your things." "Cliff, don't you love me anymore?" she asked, her voice trembling, eyes glistening with tears. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment. "Yes, I do still love you. That's what makes this so hard. I gave you everything I had, and feelings like that don't just disappear. But I can't live with you anymore. In time, I believe we'll both be better off apart. It'll hurt at first, but I think it's best if we see as little of each other as possible for the next year or so, to give us both space to heal and move on." I continued, "I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow to start the divorce process. With the prenup, it should be pretty straightforward. Please don't fight it. Dragging this out will only make it harder for both of us." June stood there, her eyes swollen from crying, taking in my words. I couldn't tell if she was starting to accept it or still trying to figure out how to change my mind. The doorbell rang, and I opened it, expecting to see Jim, her father. But he wasn't alone, he'd brought Mary, her mother. June immediately ran into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "If you've hurt her in any way, you'll regret it," Jim said, his voice steady but laced with a serious warning. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to be taken seriously. "Jim, I haven't laid a finger on her. Her bags are right there. She'll tell you everything when she's ready," I replied, keeping my voice calm. Jim glanced at the suitcases, then back at me. "You're kicking her out? What did she do to deserve this?" he asked, suspicion thick in his voice. "I'd rather she explain it." "It's too painful for me to go through again," I said, my tone flat. With that, June and her mother walked out to the car, while Jim followed behind, grabbing her bags. He shot me one last look, full of doubt, before they drove off. As soon as they were gone, I sank into my recliner and finally let the tears fall. I cried until I eventually drifted off to sleep, only waking when the morning sun came streaming through the window. It was time to face reality. I got up, showered, and began the rest of my life. I called my boss to take the day off, then contacted a lawyer to get the ball rolling. I went through the motions, closing our joint accounts, opening new ones, handling the necessary paperwork. The divorce moved quickly, with June not contesting any part of it. A month later, I still hadn't heard from Darlene, so I decided to give her a call. She told me she and Joey had moved in with her parents, who had plenty of space and were more than happy to take them in. They'd put their old house up for sale. As for Mark and June, Darlene said they had found a small apartment together, but she mentioned that they seemed to argue a lot. Darlene brought up the mental suggestion I'd given Mark and June. "Is it permanent? Will he always think there's nothing there?" she asked. I chuckled. Never underestimate the power of denial. Over time, with enough convincing from doctors or someone else, he might start questioning it and maybe even break free of the illusion. But then again, he might not. It's not exactly the kind of thing people openly talk about. Now that some of the sting had faded, I found myself feeling a little sorry for Mark. "Did you really have to do that?" Darlene asked, looking at me with curiosity. I just gave her a knowing smirk. Over time, I'd become like an unofficial uncle to Joey, and with Darlene, we developed a casual friends with benefits arrangement. Every few weeks, we'd meet up. Truth be told, I would have liked something more serious, but she wasn't interested. Too many bad memories, I suppose. At Joey's 4th birthday party, I noticed a guy I didn't recognize hanging around. When I asked Darlene if she had a new friend, she confirmed it with a simple nod. I told her I didn't want to intrude, and she knew where to find me if she ever needed anything. 7 months later, she was married to him. Seeing this new guy at the party was the signal I needed to start dating again. I began seeing a nice woman I met at the mall. It's been several months now, and I'm slowly starting to trust her, though, given my past, I'm more cautious than I'd like to be. About 14 months had passed since the divorce when I ran into Mark at the grocery store. Ironically enough, he told me that because he couldn't satisfy June, she ended up cheating on him, and he kicked her out, just like what had happened between me and her. I couldn't help but feel some sympathy for him, knowing all too well what he was going through. "So, Mark," I asked, "do you think you've learned your lesson?" He looked puzzled. "What lesson are you talking about? Will you ever cheat again or get involved with a married woman?" Mark sighed. "Even if I could, I wouldn't. My ex-wife's furious with me, and she barely lets me see Joey. The woman I cheated with ended up cheating on me too, and now I'm stuck eating TV dinners alone every night. Sometimes I wonder what the point is. I can't even find any comfort in, well, you know. I'm sorry for the part one played in the affair," I admitted. "But you need to keep pushing forward for Joey's sake. We all make mistakes. I know some people who might be able to help you out in a way that you won't even notice. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll see what they can do. On Friday night, have a couple of drinks, pass out in bed, and when you wake up, you might find things are a little different." "I won't say a word, I promise," Mark said, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Good," I replied. "And let me be clear, if I ever find out you've cheated again or messed around with another married woman, I'll come back and make sure you don't have that problem ever again." Mark nodded solemnly. "I understand. Thanks, Cliff. If this works, I'll owe you big time. You have no idea how much I've been suffering. Let's see if they can help you before you do anything drastic," I said. "And remember, keep this between us." I gave him a pointed look as I walked away, hinting that his equipment might be back in working order soon, though he'd probably wake up with a hangover too. About 6 weeks later, I bumped into Jim and Mary at the mall. I was about to just wave and move along, but Jim seemed like he wanted to talk. "Cliff, can I have a word with you?" Jim asked, looking serious. I shrugged. "Sure, go ahead." Jim and Mary both wanted to express their regrets about everything that had happened. Jim admitted he felt partially responsible because of how they'd handled the pregnancy situation all those years ago. They apologized and asked if I could find it in myself to forgive them. "Jim, Mary, none of this is your fault," I said. "Sure, you could have handled things differently back then, but you did what you thought was right at the time. Hindsight is always clearer. I don't hold anything against you, so there's no need for an apology." "Thank you, Cliff," Jim said, visibly relieved. "We appreciate it. We've also been sending June to therapy. At first it was to help her deal with the fallout from the affair, but she's been working through a lot of other issues too. She's making progress. The therapist suggested that it might help if you attended one of her sessions. You don't have to, of course, but it could really benefit her." I hesitated for a moment. "I understand," I replied, knowing it would mean reopening old wounds. "I'll think about it." Jim and Mary thanked me and walked away, leaving me to reflect on everything. It wasn't something I particularly wanted to get involved in, but the sincerity in their request made me reconsider. Jim and Mary's request weighed on me as I sat there, turning it over in my mind. The idea of going to a therapy session with June felt like ripping open old wounds, but part of me could understand why they were asking. They were good people, and despite everything that had happened, their friendship still mattered to me. Later that evening, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Jim had said the therapist thought it might help June if I showed up. I wasn't sure what kind of help I could offer, but maybe it wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about getting some closure for myself too. The next day, I texted Jim, "Let me know when and where, and I'll try to be there." His reply came almost immediately, filled with gratitude, "Thank you, Cliff. We'll let you know as soon as she schedules it with Dr. Faraday. Her usual session is tomorrow, but how does next Thursday at 4 o'clock sound?" I agreed. It couldn't hurt to sit through a session and hear what June had to say. Maybe it would help both of us find some peace and move on. Thursday rolled around, and I found myself at the therapist's office 5 minutes early, feeling a bit out of place in the waiting room. June was already sitting on the couch, dressed neatly in a navy skirt and jacket, with a white blouse underneath. It was a polished look, subtly familiar but nothing too revealing. She smiled when she saw me, though there was something reserved in her eyes. "Hi, Cliff," she greeted me warmly. "You're looking well." "You look good too," I replied. This therapist must be doing something right. "Thank you," June said softly. "I really appreciate you coming today. It means a lot to me, and to my parents." I nodded, unsure how to respond. The last time we'd seen each other, it had ended so painfully that this felt strange, almost unnatural, to sit across from her like this, trying to have a normal conversation. "Just to be clear," I said after a pause, "this isn't about reconciliation. I can't live like that." "I understand," June replied, her voice gentle. "I've prepared myself for that, though I'd be lying if I said a small part of me didn't still hope." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I'm sure you've heard about Mark and me." "Yeah," I said, "and no offense, but it didn't exactly shock me. You've always had a high desire, and with Mark not being able to meet your needs, it was bound to be a struggle." June winced slightly but nodded. "I know. Dr. Faraday has helped me come to terms with why I behaved the way I did, with both you and Mark. He's helped me work through a lot of unresolved issues, including my pregnancy and miscarriage. We believe that played a big part in how I acted." Her honesty caught me off guard. "I don't know how much I can help at this point," I said. "It almost feels like part of a 12-step program, admitting your mistakes, apologizing, trying to make amends." "It's more about healing for me," June explained. "It's about learning to forgive myself so I can move forward. I hope, eventually, you can forgive me too." "I thought those 12-step programs were for addiction," I said, raising an eyebrow. "It is," she admitted. "I've come to realize I was dealing with a form of sex addiction." She went on, "After Mark and I split up, I was out almost every night, picking up strangers, sleeping with anyone who showed interest. I was usually drunk, and I used the alcohol and intimacy to numb the pain. My parents found out and got me help. Thankfully, I didn't contract anything serious, but I was in a dark place. I'm in recovery now and haven't been involved in anything intimate for over 3 months." The silence that followed was heavy. I needed a moment to process what she had just said. Right then, Dr. Faraday came in and led us into his office. The session was intense, far more emotionally draining than I had anticipated. June laid out everything she'd been through, her regrets, and her desire to heal. I mostly listened, offering my thoughts here and there, but it was clear this was a crucial part of her recovery process. As much as it pained me, I couldn't deny that by the end, I felt a strange sense of emotional release. As we stepped out of the building, June turned to me. "Cliff, thank you again for coming today. It really means the world to me." She hesitated before asking, "Would you be open to getting coffee or maybe having a meal together?" I shook my head. "Not today, June. I've had enough emotional upheaval for now." After a brief pause, I added, "I want you to know that I feel bad about how things ended between us, especially now that I know how much you were struggling. Maybe someday we can be friends, but not right now." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded in understanding. I get it, Cliff. I'd like for us to be friends someday too. You still mean a lot to me. As we walked toward the parking lot, I gestured in the opposite direction. I'm parked over there. I guess this is goodbye, for now, at least. Good luck with your recovery. I gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and walked toward the setting sun, knowing this was probably the last time we'd cross paths. As I left, June watched me go, a tear rolling down her cheek as she realized I was walking out of her life for good.